The shooting began without a warning. One moment, the crowd was calm, sitting and listening to speakers in the warm afternoon, and the next moment, the air exploded with the sound of rifle fire. Bullets tore into the tightly packed people, and confusion instantly turned into terror. Men, women, and children screamed as people fell around them. Some tried to run, but the exits were narrow and crowded. Others tried to climb the tall walls surrounding the open ground, but they were shot before they could escape. In desperation, dozens of people threw themselves into a deep well inside the garden, hoping the bullets would not reach them. The well quickly filled with bodies as more and more people jumped in. For about 10 terrible minutes, the soldiers kept firing straight into the trapped crowd. When it finally stopped, the ground was covered with wounded and dying people. Hundreds were already dead. This horrific event became known as the Amritsar massacre, one of the most shocking moments in the history of British colonial rule in India. The massacre took place in the city of Amritsar on April 13, 1919, but the tension that led to it had been building for a long time. Just a few months earlier, the First World War had ended. During the war, more than 1 million Indian soldiers had served in the British Army, fighting in distant places across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Many Indians believed that their loyalty and sacrifice would earn them greater freedom and political rights once the war ended. Instead, the British government introduced a new law known as the Rowlatt Act. This law allowed the authorities to arrest people without trial and keep them in prison for long periods without clear evidence. Many Indians felt betrayed and humiliated. After everything they had done during the war, they were now being treated with suspicion and repression. Protests began spreading across the country. One of the most influential leaders encouraging peaceful resistance was Mahatma Gandhi. He believed that unjust laws should be resisted through non-violent protest and civil disobedience. In many cities, people organized demonstrations and gatherings to oppose the new law. Amritsar was one of the cities where anger and frustration were growing rapidly. The situation became even worse when the British authorities arrested 2 respected local political leaders who had been organizing peaceful protests. Their arrest outraged the people of the city. Crowds marched through the streets demanding their release, and some protests turned violent. Government buildings were attacked, and several Europeans were killed by angry mobs. The British administration feared that the unrest might grow into a much larger rebellion. To restore control, the government sent military forces into the city. The officer placed in charge was Reginald Dyer, a British brigadier general. Dyer believed that strong and immediate force was necessary to stop the unrest. He issued an order banning public gatherings in the city, but many residents either never heard about the order or did not understand how serious it was. Meanwhile, April 13th was the festival of Baisakhi, an important day for many people in the Punjab region. Farmers and families from surrounding villages came to Amritsar to celebrate, trade in the markets, and visit the city's famous religious sites. That afternoon, thousands of people gathered at Jallianwala Bagh, an open piece of land surrounded by high walls and buildings. The area had only a few narrow entrances and exits.
Some people in the crowd had come to attend a political meeting protesting the Rowlatt Act, but many others were simply there because of the festival. Families sat on the ground talking, children played nearby, and speakers addressed the gathering. The atmosphere was not violent. It was more like a large community gathering. Many people had no idea that the authorities had banned such meetings. While the crowd was listening to the speeches, General Dyer marched toward the garden with a group of soldiers. They carried rifles and ammunition and moved quickly toward the main entrance. When they reached the entrance, the soldiers spread out and took positions facing the crowd. The people inside the garden were confused when they saw the troops. Some expected that the soldiers would simply warn them to disperse and go home. Instead, General Dyer gave a short command to his troops. Without telling the crowd to leave, and without giving any warning at all, he ordered them to fire. The soldiers raised their rifles and began shooting directly into the mass of people. Panic immediately swept through the gathering. Thousands of people rushed toward the narrow exits, but the entrances quickly became clogged as terrified individuals tried to push their way out. Others ran toward the walls, hoping to climb over them. Each time the crowd moved in one direction, the soldiers turned and fired into the densest part of the fleeing people. The firing continued for about 10 minutes. During that time, the soldiers discharged around 1,650 rounds of ammunition. General Dyer later admitted that he deliberately aimed at the areas where the crowd was thickest because he wanted to cause the greatest possible shock. He believed that such harsh action would prevent future protests and teach the population a lesson about challenging British authority. Eventually, the soldiers stopped firing, not because the crowd had dispersed, but because they were running low on ammunition. The troops then marched out of the garden, leaving behind a scene of devastation. Because a strict curfew had been imposed across the city, people were not allowed to go outside after evening. This meant that many of the wounded remained lying on the ground throughout the night without medical help. Some slowly bled to death while calling out for water or assistance that never came. Families searching for relatives the next day found a horrifying sight. Bodies were scattered across the garden, and the walls were marked with bullet holes. The well that people had jumped into during the panic was filled with corpses. The official British report later claimed that 379 people had been killed and more than 1,200 wounded. But many Indian witnesses believed the true number of deaths was much higher, possibly exceeding 1,000. News of the massacre quickly spread across India and then around the world. The event caused outrage and disbelief. Many people could not understand how soldiers had opened fire on a crowd of unarmed civilians without even warning them to disperse. An investigation known as the Hunter Commission was established to examine what had happened. During the inquiry, General Dyer openly stated that he had intended to create a powerful moral effect on the population. He explained that his goal was to frighten the people so deeply that they would never again challenge British authority. His statements shocked many observers. Although he was eventually removed from his command, he was not severely punished. Some people in Britain even praised him for defending the empire, which made many Indians feel even more angry and betrayed. The massacre became a turning point in the relationship between India and the British Empire. Before this event, many Indian leaders had hoped that political reforms could gradually lead to greater self-government within the empire. After the tragedy at Jallianwala Bagh, that hope began to disappear. Millions of Indians lost faith in the fairness of British rule. Leaders such as Mahatma Gandhi began organizing nationwide campaigns of nonviolent resistance against colonial authority. People boycotted British goods, refused to cooperate with colonial institutions, and demanded full independence for their country. Over the following decades, the memory of the massacre remained powerful. It became a symbol of the cruelty and injustice of colonial rule and strengthened the determination of many Indians to fight for freedom. Nearly 30 years later, in 1947, India finally gained independence from British control. Today, the site of the massacre at Jallianwala Bagh has been preserved as a memorial. Visitors can still see the bullet marks in the walls and the well where terrified people jumped in their final attempt to escape the gunfire. The garden stands as a solemn reminder of the lives lost on that tragic day and of how a single act of violence helped change the course of a nation's history.